In the late 1940s, the US detonated thermonuclear weapons thousands of times larger than Hiroshima, releasing fireballs that dwarfed the military personnel observing them. The American atomic monopoly ended in September 1949, when monitoring detected radioactive mass over the Pacific. The Soviet Union had successfully detonated its own device, ending the US monopoly and accelerating a race to test multi-megaton weapons. These tests created a hazardous side effect. The fireballs pushed radioactive debris directly into the stratosphere, creating an atmospheric reservoir of fission products that slowly drifted across the entire globe. To calculate the hazard, the Atomic Energy Commission launched Project Gabriel. But Gabriel was a one-man project based on theoretical math. Researchers used models to guess how many detonations the planet could survive before the air, soil, and water became an existential threat to human life. While government public relations campaigns assured the public that global fallout was harmless, AEC officials privately recognized that their mathematical models lacked any empirical validation. They were guessing at the limits of human survival without any real-world proof. The Atomic Energy Commission needed to move beyond theoretical equations. To understand the biological consequences of testing, they required physical, empirical evidence of how radiation was moving through the environment. Researchers identified strontium-90 as the most hazardous byproduct to track. With a physical half-life of 28 years, this radioactive isotope stays active for decades, making it the primary marker for long-term biological damage. On August 6, 1953, the AEC and the Air Force launched Project Sunshine. The secret international research program was commissioned to build a global monitoring network to measure the environmental transport and biological uptake of strontium-90. Project Sunshine established a global monitoring network that treated the entire biosphere as a laboratory. The AEC began tracking real-world radiation levels within living tissues to evaluate the specific biological hazards of nuclear warfare. Strontium-90 descends from its reservoir in the stratosphere over several years, depositing globally via precipitation. Once it hits the ground, it is absorbed by plants and integrated into the soil. From the soil, the isotope moves into the agricultural food chain. Dairy cattle graze on contaminated grass, ingesting the radioactive particles as they feed. The isotope bypasses standard filters, concentrating directly in the cow's milk supply. This created a direct path for fallout to move from a weapon's fireball into human food supplies. Upon human ingestion, the body falls into a biological trap. Because strontium is a chemical analog to calcium, the human metabolic system cannot distinguish between the two. The body accepts the radioactive strontium-90 and binds it directly into the calcium-rich matrices of the skeleton. Once absorbed, this bone-seeking isotope emits high-energy beta particles that irradiate the surrounding bone cells and marrow. This internal exposure causes osteosarcomas, bone cancers, and leukemias. Because of this unique biochemistry, a human skeleton became the most accurate tool for evaluating the true reach of global nuclear fallout. Stillborn babies, infants, and young children were the primary targets for this research. Their rapidly growing skeletons require rapid calcium deposition, meaning they absorb strontium-90 at a significantly higher rate than mature adults. By 1955, the lack of pediatric samples became a bottleneck for AEC modeling. During a closed meeting, Commissioner Willard Libby emphasized the need for a systematic collection effort, stating that if anybody knows how to do a good job of body snatching, they will really be serving their country. Geochemist J. Lawrence Cope coordinated a doctor-to-doctor network to bypass legal protocols and parental consent. This international pipeline exploited charity wards and public hospitals, where pathologists removed bones and limbs from deceased infants during routine autopsies without informing the families. Pathologists used physical masking techniques to hide the theft. In Australia, medical staff removed infant femurs and replaced them with rigid plastic rods. This restored the shape of the limbs before the bodies were returned to grieving parents for burial. In their effort to measure the global impact of fallout, democratic states systematically harvested the remains of their most vulnerable citizens, performing secret amputations on deceased infants before returning them for burial. These stolen pediatric bones were reduced to anonymous ash samples for radiochemical analysis. This black boxing process integrated ethically compromised data into mathematical formulas while masking the human origin of the research. The AEC and the World Health Organization used this data to calculate acceptable radiation limits. By framing these calculations as objective science, they maintained control over international policy and marginalized scientists who advocated for stricter safety standards. The cover-up lasted for decades, until December 1993, when U.S. Secretary of Energy Hazel O'Leary announced the Openness Initiative. This policy led to the declassification of over 1 million pages of records related to Cold War human radiation research. In 1994, President Bill Clinton issued an executive order creating the Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments. The committee's report, alongside international inquiries in the UK and Australia, helped grieving families finally locate the graves of children whose remains had been harvested. The exposure of these harvesting networks led directly to the Human Tissue Act 2004. This legislation established the Human Tissue Authority, making explicit informed consent the fundamental legal requirement for all post-mortem examinations and research in the United Kingdom. The legacy of Project Sunshine is a demonstration of how the pursuit of military data can lead a scientific establishment to bypass ethical constraints when research is conducted behind a wall of state secrecy.